Friday night, though, to me, was simply an embarrassment, and that can't happen. And while maybe Angel feels badly about it, we don't know. Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Fair Territory, the Monday edition. We've got the Thursday edition with Alana Rizzo, of course, coming up later in the week. As always, we have a ton to talk about, and I want to start off this week talking about something off the field, something that has dominated the discussion in baseball for quite some time now, and of course, I'm talking about Shohei Ohtani and the aftermath of the complaint issued by the federal government against Ippei Mizuhara for massive bank fraud. We've seen the complaint now, all 37 pages. If you haven't read it, I advise you to read it. Yet even for some who have read it, there remain questions. And it's natural to have questions. A lot of you remain skeptical. I remain skeptical too. It's the reporter's instinct in me. But the complaint does answer a lot of what we've been asking in recent weeks. And actually, a number of articles that we've written in The Athletic answer some questions too. But to show you the skepticism that is out there, I want to present to you a clip from MSNBC on Friday night when I appeared with Stephanie Ruhle, and consider Stephanie's reaction to this whole brouhaha and how she started this question to me on the appearance.
Nameless, not faceless guy is the fall guy for a bigger scheme here. You don't think that's possible?
Stephanie, anything is possible, and I'm not going to rule out anything, and I'm certainly not on the inside here to know, because this relationship between the two of them was incredibly close as an interpreter and player can be. Basically, Mizuhara controlled a lot of different aspects of Ohtani's life, or was involved in a lot of different aspects. Now, you say, well, what if he's just the fall guy? What if Ohtani is simply paying him to, as you say, take the fall? I'd believe that a lot more if Mizuhara was facing maybe a year or two in prison, and perhaps he pleads guilty to get the sentence lesser than, of course, the 30 years, and I don't imagine it will be 30 years. But let's say he goes to prison for 6 years, for 10 years. That's a heck of a fall to take for a good friend, even if you've got money coming out at the end of it.
Okay, so that was part of the discussion I had with Stephanie Ruhle. And about the fall guy, I want to continue on that line a little bit. If you remember Barry Bonds' The Perjury Trial, and you remember his trainer, Greg Anderson, went to jail as the fall guy for Barry Bonds. He went to jail for more than a year because he refused to testify in that trial. A year is a long time, granted. It's not what I believe Ippei Mizuhara is facing. And yet, again, people are going to believe what they believe, as I wrote on Thursday night after the complaint came out. And again, there are questions that still remain. Does the complaint definitively rule out that Ohtani bet? It does not. What it says is that Ohtani and Ippei Mizuhara, through all their thousands of text conversations, never discussed betting. That's not totally definitive, but it's pretty far along. Where is the missing $24 million? Now, it's obviously documented now that more than $16 million was taken from Ohtani's account by Mizuhara, but as you read the complaint, you see that there were $40 million in losses. Where is that missing $24 million? Maybe it's money still owed. We don't know. Why would a bookie let Mizuhara run up credit the way he did? For this one, I advise you to read Andy McCullough's article from a couple of weeks back explaining that bookies will run up credit and allow credit to attract high-profile clients. This is what illegal bookies do. They want these guys on the hook. Now, Mizuhara himself wasn't necessarily high profile financially, but the guy behind him certainly was. And as long as you show an ability to pay, as Mizuhara did, though he certainly had some problems along those lines, if you read the complaint, then they'll keep going. So all of these questions are in there. And there's another one too that came up in the comments under my initial column here. This was on Thursday. Somebody said, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you add up all of Ohtani's baseball salaries, if you look at his baseball salaries, he doesn't have that much money in there. He doesn't have enough necessarily to cover this. Well, that's not exactly true. It's not true at all, actually. Most of the money that was wired from his accounts came in 2022 and 23. During those 2 years, he made about $35 million. And even if you account for taxes, let's say it's half, that's still more than $16 million. And Who knows? Maybe Ohtani didn't even touch the baseball income from all the years previous. We don't know any of that. So if you read about this kind of thing, you will understand that most of the time the government goes after the bookie and not the bettor. So maybe they don't care. And maybe Ohtani in some fashion was betting, even though there is absolutely no evidence of it. Now, if they were not alleging Mizuhara committed bank fraud, maybe they wouldn't even go after him because, again, he is the bettor. But what he did was steal. So that's why he is the subject of this investigation. That is why he has been charged. And keep in mind, too, even if Ohtani was betting illegally, even if that was happening, as long as he wasn't betting on baseball, the league probably wouldn't do much but fine him. And we have precedent for that. We've written about this in The Athletic. Jared Cosart in 2015 was found to have bet with illegal bookmakers. He received only a fine. So when you put it all together, when you read the complaint, and when you try to figure this all out, is there definitive, absolute 100% proof that Ohtani didn't bet, that Ohtani wasn't involved? No. We probably will never get that. The prosecutors in this complaint only include what they want to include. That's important to keep in mind. But at the same time, guys, the complaint is a pretty clear, vivid portrait of what seems to have gone on. Now, I wrote in my column about the conspiracy theorists, about how they're going to have a hard time with this one because what it seems here is a pretty clear case of open and shut. Pretty definitive, right? Doesn't mean reporters will stop trying to get answers. That's what reporters do. And in fact, this scandal only broke publicly because reporters started asking questions about the wire transfers from Ohtani's account to the illegal bookie. That came up in the investigation of the bookie in question. So yes, reporters are going to continue to work on this. And maybe reporters will find more, maybe not. But at the same time, while we should all have a healthy skepticism, and while we all understand that cover-ups to protect the wealthy are not entirely uncommon in our society, at some point, what you guys are speculating on in social media and what we are doing as reporters, they're two different things. As reporters, we can only write what we can verify. And I'm not talking about opinion columns here. I'm talking about news stories. We can't just speculate and go off on tangents and say, hey, what about this? What about that? That's what social media is for, I guess. At least that's how it's used. To this point, to wrap it all up, based on what we know, based on Ohtani's statement in his news conference, and based on the complaint, the 37 pages of detailed investigation by the federal government, 3 different agencies. You look at all that, it's kind of tough to say, hey, Ohtani did it here. If something else emerges, okay. But Ohtani would not be the first big-time professional athlete to be duped out of money or to invest it in some poor way. There are all kinds of ways athletes have lost money, and I listed 3 in my column. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was one, John Elway, Bobby Orr, the list goes on and on. So if he was doing something untoward and is proceeding with his baseball career in a brilliant fashion, he's off to an amazing start despite all this. If he is that unperturbed, then he's either an incredible sociopath, a guy who just is blocking out the world and can justify any action, or maybe, just maybe, he actually didn't do anything wrong, and that this is all on the up and up, and that maybe we should look at that document and say, okay, based on what we know, it looks like he's pretty much in the clear. Is it within the realm of possibility that that is not the case, that he did something, that he bet, that he was involved in a greater way than we understand with Ippei, even to the point of knowing what Ippei was doing? Yes, that is within the realm of possibility. Is it reality? At this point, it would be very hard for us to say that definitively. At this point, it seems hard to prove. Time now for the Inside Dish. This is the part of the show where I go inside a story I've written, inside a trend in the game. And this week I want to do something a little bit different. I want to talk about 3 teams that are experiencing or have experienced rotation blows, either through injury, through trade, whatever the case might be. These 3 teams are not necessarily related, but they all are prominent teams in our sport. And yes, I could pick all 30 and go all day long talking about pitching injuries and how they're affecting certain teams. But I'm going to choose these three because all of them are quite interesting in one form or another. And let's start with the Houston Astros. That's a group I saw this weekend with AJ Pierzynski of Foul Territory and Connor Onion making his Major League Baseball broadcasting debut at Minute Maid Park. The Astros beat the Rangers on our broadcast Saturday, beat them again on Sunday, and yet they are still only 6-11. Now, granted, the season's only 1/10 old, barely 1/10 old, but at the same time, the Astros are in a bit of a precarious place, as I wrote on Monday in The Athletic. Let's take a look at their current rotation and their injured starters. And you tell me which one you'd rather have, which group. The current rotation, Ronel Blanco, perhaps the biggest surprise in the game thus far. Christian Javier, brilliant on Sunday. And then three younger pitchers who have not fared well, at least so far. Hunter Brown, J.P. France, and Spencer Arrighetti, their top prospect. Now let's look at their injured starters. These are guys who eventually should return. Justin Verlander could return as soon as Friday night. Framber Valdez, the Astros are saying it's not serious. We'll see. It's an elbow. Jose Urquidy still really not progressing, although he is expected back at some point in the first half. Lance McCullers, late June, early July. Luis Garcia, sometime around the All-Star break. If that group comes back and they're healthy, then things get to look a little bit better for the Astros. No question about it. You can put some of these other pitchers in the bullpen, perhaps. You can do a lot of different things. But as I wrote, they're in a weird spot. Their farm system is not good. They've lost picks, obviously, through the scandal. They have not drafted higher than 28th since 2017. That will lead at times to a thinner system. And as I wrote also, the signing of Josh Hader wasn't what they really needed. They need help in middle inning relief. They had a closer, Ryan Presley, and they had a setup man, Brian Abreu, but they lost some 207 innings with the setup men who either were injured or departed as free agents. So the Astros are one team to watch as far as the evolution of their rotation. Rangers are much in the same position. They've got Scherzer, DeGrom, and Tyler Mahle coming back at some point. Scherzer perhaps by early May. So they too will evolve. But with all of these guys, you're assuming that once they're back, they're healthy and that other pitchers won't get hurt. And we know, of course, that that necessarily is not the case. Then there is a team that suffered the biggest blow thus far, I would say, considering they're a World Series contender and beyond that, maybe even the best team in baseball when this guy is healthy. I'm talking, of course, about Spencer Strider. Now, the Braves' current rotation, when you look at it without Strider, is not nearly as imposing. In fact, it's kind of questionable if you think about it. We're talking about a group that starts off with, of course, Max Fried. Max Fried is an ace, no doubt about that. He's pitching better after kind of a rough start. Chris Sale's been good so far, not so good over the weekend, but okay. Charlie Morton, Ronaldo Lopez, who as a starter, so far so good, and Darius Vines, who will make his third Major League start on Monday night. That's the current group. Now, who are they missing? Well, we know who they're missing. They're missing Spencer Strider. And it's funny because I was on Jason Stark's podcast right before the season started, and he said, okay, how can things fall apart for the Braves? And I mentioned that if one of their pitchers or more gets injured, it's a much different equation. Now, Strider's hurt. He's out for the year. That's bad enough. Chris Sale hasn't exactly been a picture of health. Charlie Morton is 40-something years old. You have the potential for other things to occur as well. And that's why it's fair to wonder how the Braves are going to come out of all this, how they're going to piece this together going forward. Now, last year, when Max Fried was hurt, Bryce Elder stepped up. And they have a group of pitchers who might step up as well. Some prospects, some other guys at AAA who have some big league experience. They are not without depth, but it's not Spencer Strider. So that's a problem for the Braves, clearly, even though their offense is amazing. And even though their bullpen, while it's had a couple of hiccups, has been mostly brilliant this season. All right, the final team is actually one of my favorite teams in baseball. Now, I don't root. You guys know that. I write about all teams. I'm critical of them. You think I hate them all. But this team routinely outperforms what we expect of them. And I'm talking about the Milwaukee Brewers. Best record in the National League right now at 10-4. And let's look at their current rotation because it's not exactly what you would seem to be thinking of as imposing. Their current rotation, well, Freddie Peralta has been brilliant so far. Wade Miley, an accomplished veteran. DL Hall came over in the Burns trade and has been inconsistent so far. Colin Ray and Joe Ross, who hasn't even pitched since 2021. Now let's look at who the Brewers are missing. And it's not just pitching we're going to talk about here. Let's start with who's gone from 2023. Corbin Burns, of course, you know about that trade. Corbin Burns faced his former team yesterday. Orioles won that game. Adrian Hauser, he went to the Mets. Injured pitchers, Jacob Junis, who they signed as a free agent. Devin Williams, the closer, the great closer, who's out for some time. Brandon Woodruff, we don't expect to see him this season. And then there are some outfielders injured as well. Christian Yelich, who is off to a brilliant start, and Garrett Mitchell. So on that same podcast I was on with Jason, I said, I always like the Brewers. I always expect them to be better than we think because they've done that over the years. What's interesting is that they're doing it with a different manager now. This is not Craig Counsell's team. This is a team run by his former bench coach, Pat Murphy, and yet they're playing above themselves again. Now, they've got good young position talent. They've got Willy Adames and Yelich as veterans. They have some pieces that other teams surely would want and have wanted. At the same time, I don't know that we expected the Brewers at any point of the season to have a better record than Craig Counsell's Cubs, not after losing Burns and Woodruff and Devin Williams. And yet here they are again. Now, can that rotation hold together? I have my doubts. Obviously, we're all going to have our doubts about that. But the Brewers are so interesting because Murphy, in that transition from bench coach to manager, that's not always easy. Joe Espada is doing the same thing with the Astros, bench coach to manager. And what happens when that transition takes place on the same team is that the relationships change. It's one thing when you're the bench coach. It's another thing when you're the manager. Responsibilities are different. The bench coach can be involved in certain ways with players and talk to players a certain way, whereas the manager is the one making, of course, the harder decisions. But it's interesting that over the weekend, I had a conversation with Josh Hader, who, of course, spent many years with the Brewers. And Hader said that Murphy has a great way about him, a way that is often lighthearted. Murphy's one of the great jokesters in the game. He's always teasing players. And yet at the same time, he has a firmness about him too, a demand for excellence. Again, with all of these teams, we're just talking about the start of the season. There's nothing definitive yet. And even in my column about the Astros that Astros fans already are ripping me for, I make it clear we can't count the Astros out. So much can happen. What I was saying in that column was that the Astros roster, as presently constituted, is flawed. We'll see how it all shakes out for each of these three teams, but overcoming the loss of pitching, the losses of starting pitchers to injury in relief pitchers as well, that's going to be the story of the season for many teams. And the teams that do it best, the teams that figure it out, and you can look at virtually any contender and have these same kinds of discussions, the Dodgers included. Those teams that get there, that find a path to October and then through October, well, those are going to be the teams that succeed, the teams we're going to see in the World Series, the team that ultimately will be crowned champion of 2024. Time now for Grillin Ken. Time now for your questions. Let's get right to them on this Monday. First question comes from none other than Scott Braun, the host of Foul Territory, the man, the myth, the legend. Scott asks, are the Braves okay with their rotation now that the crappy news about Strider out for 2024 is official? I'm thinking they could suddenly be big players at the deadline for a playoff starter. Scott, great question. You're on it as always. And the answer is yes. I would expect that at the deadline, they will be players for a starting pitcher. Now, I mentioned earlier that who knows, this might not be their last injury. I would expect it probably won't be their last injury, right? Just based on what starting pitching is like in 2024, what happens to these guys over the course of a season. The problem for the Braves, if they want to trade for a starter, is that their system is not really right now one of the better ones in Major League Baseball. Baseball America, in fact, has the Braves system as the fifth worst in the game. So they're not exactly loaded with prospects. That said, their president of baseball operations, Alex Anthopoulos, is relentless. He is endlessly creative. And if they need a starting pitcher at the deadline, I assume Anthopoulos is going to figure something out and go get one. How it's going to happen, which pitchers will be available, where exactly the Braves will be at that point in the season, I don't know. But sure, with Strider out, I would expect them to be active. All right, let's get to our next question. It comes from J-Dub the gamer, actually. He asks, you get one automatic addition to the Hall of Fame. Excluding Rose and Shoeless Joe, who is the one person you're unilaterally putting in Cooperstown? It's a great question. And the natural inclination for me is to say Bonds and Clemens. I know that's two people, but they are linked in this thing. And I voted for Bonds and Clemens in the latter years of their eligibility. And yes, I believe they should be there. Others disagree, of course, but those are the two ones that stick out, right? But I'm going to go off the board a little bit. Over the years, there have been, due to the crowded ballot in many cases, but other circumstances as well, players who have fallen off the ballot after just 1 year of eligibility. Some of those guys are much more deserving of a longer look, and it bothers me that they didn't get that longer look. And of course, they are subject to election from the veterans committees, the various veterans committees that exist. But as the writers, as the voting members from the Baseball Writers Association of America, I feel in some cases we missed the boat. The guy I'm talking about here, the guy I want to mention, is Lou Whitaker. Lou Whitaker had a brilliant career as part of a double play combination with Alan Trammell for the Detroit Tigers. Alan Trammell is in the Hall of Fame. Lou Whitaker got 2.9% of the vote in 2001 and was off the ballot immediately. This makes no sense to me. And if you recall, if you read what I wrote about this year's ballot, I voted for Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley. Why? Because while you might consider both borderline in many respects, and I understand that, they, in my mind, are inextricably linked. They are guys who, yes, had Hall of Fame type careers, and I can't think of one without the other. I would say that's even truer with Whitaker and Trammell. Trammell is in, Whitaker should be in. That's the one I would like to add. And yes, there are maybe a dozen others or more that I would say the same about, but that's the case I'm making today. All right, let's go to our final question. It comes from Randy Silver TV, who asks, would love your insight into the MLB and umpire union relationship. I know you just can't fire somebody, but I'm curious how it works if the MLB and players find an ump is consistently not doing their job well. What is, or is there even a process for relieving the ump? Randy, I think I know who you're talking about. Let's go to the tape, let's go to the data, and let's look at Friday night. An at-bat that Wyatt Langford, the rookie from the Texas Rangers, took with Ángel Hernández behind the plate. All right, here we go. You can see the pitches, and you can see the calls. And it's pretty clear that JP France is not throwing strikes here, and he seems to go further and further out as the at-bat progresses because he keeps getting the call outside. 6 inches outside, 7 inches outside. And it's Ángel Hernández, of course, behind the plate. Wyatt Langford is a rookie. He's not going to argue. Bruce Bochy has seen this 100 times before. He doesn't feel it's worth it, obviously. And yet, Wyatt Langford is rung up and not particularly fairly. I mean, this is not even close, right, guys? So here we are again, another Angel issue, another ump show. And you can look at the breakdown of where the pitches were. Those are not strikes. So to get to the question that Randy Silver asked, the answer is that Ángel Hernández, yes, is protected by the umpires union, and they can't simply fire him. That's not how it works. Major League Baseball, through Angel's lawsuit against them over the years, we have come to learn, is quite unhappy with Ángel Hernández. Remember, Angel sued because he felt he was not getting World Series assignments that he should have gotten, whatever. In those court documents that came out, MLB's unhappiness with him became quite clear. Obviously, MLB cannot simply remove Angel as an ump, and it does drive people crazy when you see things like this. Now, I want to make it clear, umpires by and large do an amazing job, and even Angel gets most of the calls right, but there are some he doesn't, and they seem to stick out. They seem to generate attention on social media. Friday night, though, to me, was simply an embarrassment. And that can't happen. And while maybe Angel feels badly about it, we don't know. At the same time, this is the kind of thing that draws questions like the one Randy just asked. And those questions are quite understandable. I want to thank everyone for your questions. Thank you for listening, for watching. You know where to find us. YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Like us, subscribe to us. Connect with us in any way that you can think of. We will be back on Thursday with our second show of the week, the one I co-host with Alana Rizzo. Yes, we're up to 2 a week now. And join us then. Have a great week, and we will talk to you on Thursday.
The first bet $1,500 offer is on. Download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android, or visit BetMGM.com. Sign up and deposit at least $10 into your new account. Place your first wager and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets. If the bet loses, got to use the bonus code FOUL, F-O-U-L. And if that bet does lose, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Fair Territory airs each week, and we'd love for you to become part of our community. Here's another video you might enjoy. See you next time.